My name is Patricia Morrison. I'm 60 years old, and I'm standing in an empty kitchen that used to be mine, watching the morning light stream through windows that no longer have curtains. On the marble counter, the one where I made thousands of breakfasts, packed hundreds of lunches, and wrote more checks than I can count, sits a black leather binder, 3 inches thick, 16 years of receipts, bank statements, and wire transfers, all organized chronologically. Next to it, a set of house keys. I'm not angry. I'm not crying. I'm just done. The thing about giving everything is that eventually you run out. And when you finally stop, people act shocked that you had limits at all. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where it started. Back to a spring evening in Atlanta when the magnolias were blooming and I still believed in second chances. I met James Thompson at a charity gala in 2009. One of those elegant affairs where Atlanta's professional class gathered to bid on artwork they didn't really want and write checks that would look good on their taxes. I was 44, divorced for nearly 15 years, and comfortable in my own skin in a way I'd never been in my 20s. I'd spent 2 decades building a career in finance, bought my own house in Buckhead 5 years earlier, and had long since made peace with the fact that I'd never had children. Or so I thought. James was standing by the silent auction tables, staring at a particularly garish abstract painting with an expression somewhere between confusion and horror. I couldn't help myself. "If you're trying to figure out which way is up," I said, walking over with my champagne, "I don't think it matters." He turned, and when he laughed, something in my chest loosened. He had kind eyes, the kind that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "James Thompson," he said, extending his hand. "Patricia Morrison. Trish." We talked for an hour. Easy things at first. The questionable art, Atlanta traffic, the eternal quest for a decent peach at the grocery store. He was 48, worked in consulting, and had that particular brand of Southern charm that felt genuine rather than performative. It wasn't until our 3rd date that he told me about Sophie. We were at a quiet Italian place in Virginia Highland, and I'd noticed he kept checking his phone. Not in a rude way, but in the way of someone making sure a teenager hadn't burned the house down. "I have a daughter," he said finally, setting his phone face down on the table like he was laying down a card he wasn't sure I'd want to see. "She's 16. It's been hard for her." Such small words for such big grief. His wife, Sophie's mother, had died 3 years earlier. Breast cancer. Diagnosed when Sophie was 11, gone by the time she was 14. The age when girls need their mothers most. I didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes. I just reached across the table and touched his hand. "What's she like?" I asked. His whole face changed. "Smart, stubborn, looks just like me, but she has her mother's smile." He paused. "I don't see it much these days." We dated for a year before he proposed. A year of careful courtship, of me learning the rhythms of a man who carried grief like a second skin, of slowly being introduced to a daughter who looked at me like I was an intruder in a museum, something to be observed from a distance but never touched. When James asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. I loved him, and I thought, God, I really thought, that love would be enough. I moved into James's house in Buckhead in the spring of 2010. It was a beautiful colonial with a wide front porch, ancient oak trees, and rooms that still held the ghost of the woman who decorated them. I didn't try to erase her. How could I? She was Sophie's mother. She'd always be there, invisible but present. Sophie was 17 by then, a high school senior. She had James's dark hair and serious eyes, and according to everyone who knew her mother, she had inherited her smile. I wouldn't know. In those first few years, I rarely saw it. She wasn't cruel. I want to be clear about that. Sophie was raised well. She said good morning when we passed in the hallway, answered when I asked about her day, thanked me when I drove her to school. But it was the kind of politeness that keeps you at arm's length, the kind that says, I'll tolerate you, but don't get comfortable. I didn't push. I didn't sit her down for heart-to-hearts or suggest shopping trips like in the movies. I didn't ask her to call me Mom. I just showed up. I packed her lunches when James traveled for work. I drove her to school on the mornings when she overslept. I asked about her math test and didn't take it personally when she gave one-word answers. I attended parent-teacher conferences when James was in Chicago or Dallas or wherever his consulting firm sent him that week. You're good with her, James would say, kissing my forehead before bed. But I noticed he said it from the doorway, never from beside me. He worked long hours, traveled twice a month. When he was home, he was exhausted, not just physically, but in that bone-deep way that grief exhausts people. I told myself it was temporary, that we were all adjusting, that love and patience were investments that would eventually pay dividends. By the end of the 3rd year, something shifted. Sophie started lingering in the kitchen while I cooked dinner. She'd perch on one of the bar stools and tell me about a fight with her best friend or a teacher she thought was unfair. Small things, but they felt enormous. Once she fell asleep on the couch during a movie. I covered her with a blanket, and when James came home from a late meeting, he smiled at the sight. "She trusts you," he whispered. I wanted so badly to believe him. Sophie chose Emory University. It made sense. She wanted to stay close to home, to Atlanta, to the life she knew. The tuition was $48,000 a year. "I can help with that," I said when James brought up the finances. "Trish, you don't have to." "I want to." And I did. This was what parents did, wasn't it? They invested in their children's futures. The fact that Sophie wasn't technically mine didn't change the fact that I'd been showing up for her for 3 years, that I'd been there for the college applications, the SAT prep, the late-night panics about whether she'd get in. I wrote the check. James looked relieved. Sophomore year, Sophie decided the dorms were too noisy. She needed her own place to focus, she said. We found her an apartment in Virginia Highland, $1,500 a month. I furnished it. When she said the couch wasn't her style, I returned it and got a different one. When she turned 20, I bought her a car, a Honda Accord, reliable, safe, $35,000. James gave her a card. I gave her independence. Her junior year, she studied abroad in Florence. $18,000 for the program, plus whatever showed up on the credit card I'd given her for emergencies. Weekend trips to Paris, Barcelona, Rome. I paid the bills without comment. After graduation, Sophie wanted to start a business, a subscription box service for Southern goods, artisanal jams, handmade soaps, local artwork. It sounded charming. She had a business plan, a manufacturer lined up, even a cute name, Southern Charm Box. "I just need startup capital," she said, sitting at my kitchen table with her laptop and big dreams. I invested $60,000. The business closed in 6 months. Turns out, the subscription box market was oversaturated, and Sophie hadn't really understood the logistics of inventory management or shipping costs. She cried on my couch for 2 hours. I held her hand and told her failure was part of learning, that every entrepreneur had setbacks, that this didn't mean she couldn't try again. Then I quietly paid off the warehouse lease and the remaining supplier debts. Another $15,000. She never asked how I managed it. Maybe she assumed I had unlimited resources. Maybe she didn't think about it at all. Those years were full of small crises that became my responsibility. A car accident. Not her fault, but there were medical bills. First month's rent every time she moved, which was often. 4 apartments in 5 years. Every time I showed up with boxes and patience. At 2 a.m, when her boyfriend ended things over text and she called sobbing. At the hospital when she thought she had appendicitis. It was gas, but the fear was real. At Sunday dinners when she and James argued about politics, and I smoothed things over so we could finish the meal in peace. She went through 3 jobs in 4 years. Marketing coordinator, event planner, social media manager. None of them felt right, she said. She was still figuring out her path. I understood. I'd been young once too, though my 20s had looked different. I'd worked 2 jobs to pay off student loans. I'd eaten ramen more nights than I could count. But I didn't mention that. What good would it do? "You're so good with her, Trish," James would say. He meant it as a compliment, but I noticed he always said it from the doorway, from a distance. He provided the salary that paid for his life, but I provided everything else. The time, the patience, the 3 a.m. phone calls, the emotional labor that no one thought to name or count. Something changed around the time Sophie turned 26. Small shifts, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. She forgot to call me on my birthday. She made plans with James for dinner but didn't invite me. She started spending more time with Linda Sullivan, James's sister, who'd never particularly liked me. Linda had opinions about how I wasn't real family the way James's late wife had been. I'd ignored Linda's comments for years, but I noticed Sophie listening. Still, when Sophie called, I answered. When she needed money for a security deposit or a car repair or a bill she couldn't quite cover, I sent it. I kept a folder on my computer, receipts, bank transfers, statements. Not because I planned to use them. I kept them because I'm a planner. I balance checkbooks. I save receipts. That's what responsible adults do. I just never imagined those records would become evidence. 2 months before everything fell apart, Sophie got engaged. She called me first, before James, before her friends. Her voice was bright with joy, breathless in a way that made her sound young again. "Trish, he proposed. Kevin proposed." I was folding laundry when my phone rang. I sat down on the bed, pressed the phone to my ear, and listened as she described the restaurant, the ring, the way he'd gotten down on one knee and how people at nearby tables had applauded. My chest felt tight in a good way. For a moment, I let myself believe that this call, this trust, this joy she was sharing with me meant something. Kevin was 30, a software engineer at a tech company in Midtown. I'd met him a handful of times over the 8 months they'd been dating. He was quiet in the way some men are when they're observant rather than shy. He opened doors. He listened when Sophie talked. He seemed steady, solid. I liked him. The wedding was set for late September. They'd found a venue in the Blue Ridge Mountains, about 2 hours north of Atlanta. 200 guests, a ceremony overlooking the valley, reception in a restored barn with string lights and mountain views. Sophie showed me pictures on her phone, swiping through images of exactly the kind of wedding I'd imagined she'd want. Magazine perfect. Expensive. We met with the wedding planner the following week. Christine Wells had a leather portfolio and the calm, efficient manner of someone who'd planned 1,000 weddings and knew exactly how much each dream would cost. She walked us through the numbers. The venue alone was $85,000. Then there was the catering, 200 guests at $175 per plate, the imported orchids, the string quartet, the photographer whose work Sophie had fallen in love with on Instagram. The numbers climbed quickly. I watched Sophie's face, saw the anxiety she was trying to hide. Kevin's parents didn't have this kind of money. His father was a high school teacher, his mother a nurse. Good people. Modest means. James cleared his throat. "So how much should we contribute?" I looked at Sophie's face, at the worry lines between her eyebrows, at the way she was gripping Kevin's hand. "I'll handle it," I said. "All of it." James turned to me. "Trish, it's what mothers do," I said. "Even stepmothers." Sophie's eyes filled with tears. She stood up and hugged me so hard I could barely breathe. "You're the best," she said into my shoulder. "Kevin's family could never afford something like this. This means everything." James squeezed my hand across the table. He didn't touch me often anymore. We'd become more like friendly roommates than husband and wife. But in that moment, he did. For a moment, sitting in Christine's office, flipping through vendor catalogs and tasting cake samples that all tasted the same, I felt like we were a family. A real one. I should have known better. The next few weeks were full of appointments, cake tastings, flower arrangements, invitation designs. I went to all of them. Sophie wanted my opinion on everything. Should the napkins be ivory or champagne? Was the calligraphy too formal? Did I think the save the dates should include a photo of them or just elegant typography? I felt useful, needed. Then one afternoon at the florist, I made a suggestion. "What about adding some wildflowers to the orchid arrangements?" I said, looking at the elegant but sterile mock-ups. "Something local, a touch of the mountains." Sophie glanced at Christine, then back at me. "Trish, no offense, but wildflowers would look cheap. This isn't a barn wedding." "I thought the reception was in a barn," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "A restored barn," Sophie corrected, her voice sharp. "There's a difference." Christine looked uncomfortable. Kevin, who'd come along, studied his phone. "Of course," I said. "You're right." Sophie went back to the orchids. I stood there holding my purse, feeling something shift in the room, something small, something I couldn't quite name. Later in the car, James said Sophie was just stressed, that weddings did that to people, that I shouldn't take it personally. I nodded and looked out the window at the traffic on Peachtree Street and told myself he was right. I told myself a lot of things back then that turned out not to be true. 5 weeks before the wedding, we gathered to finalize seating arrangements. It should have been simple. Who sits where? Who gets placed next to whom? The small politics of a large wedding. We'd spread the charts across the coffee table in my living room, printed spreadsheets with little boxes representing tables, names typed in neat rows. Sophie had color-coded them. Pink for her side, blue for Kevin's, yellow for mutual friends. James sat in his usual chair by the window. Kevin was on the couch next to Sophie, laptop open, cross-referencing the guest list. I was on the love seat with a pen, making notes. It felt domestic, normal. The four of us working together on something that mattered. Then Sophie's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and smiled. "It's Uncle Robert." Before anyone could respond, she'd tapped the speaker button and set the phone on the coffee table between us. "Libby." The voice was warm, southern, rough around the edges. "Uncle Robert, James's late wife's brother. I'd met him twice. Once at our wedding, once at a family reunion 3 years ago. He'd been kind to me both times, in that polite but distant way people are when they're not quite sure what to make of you." "Uncle Rob!" Sophie's whole face lit up. "How are you?" "Good, honey. Real good. I'm calling about the wedding. Got my flight booked. Coming in the Friday before. Wouldn't miss it for the world." "I'm so glad," Sophie said, and I could hear the emotion in her voice. "It means so much that you'll be there. Your mama would be so proud of you, sweetheart." Robert's voice got softer. "Wish she could see this. See you all grown up, marrying a good man?" Sophie's eyes filled with tears. "I know. I wish she could be here too." There was a pause, and then Robert said something that made the air in the room change. "I'm just so glad you're keeping it family. Real family only. No outsiders, just the people who really matter. Your mom would have wanted that." Sophie laughed. Actually laughed. "I know, right? That's exactly how I feel. Just real family." I froze. The pen in my hand stopped moving. I looked up from the seating chart and stared at Sophie, waiting for her to correct him, to explain, to say something that would make those words mean something different than what they sounded like. She didn't. I turned to James. He was staring at the spreadsheet in his lap like it contained the secrets of the universe. His jaw was tight. He wouldn't look up, wouldn't look at me. Kevin shifted on the couch, uncomfortable. He glanced at Sophie, then at me, then down at his hands. "Sophie," I said, keeping my voice calm, steady. "What does your uncle mean by that?" She looked startled, like she'd forgotten I was in the room. "Oh, nothing. He's just Uncle Rob being Uncle Rob. I'll call you back later, okay?" "Sure thing, honey. Love you." "Love you too." She ended the call and picked up her phone, not meeting my eyes. "Sophie," I said again, "what did your uncle mean? No outsiders?" She sighed, annoyed, like I was being difficult. "Trish, it's not a big deal. Can we not do this right now? We still have to finish the seating chart." I'd like to understand what he meant. She set her phone down on the coffee table harder than necessary. "Fine. You want to know? Uncle Robert and I talked about the wedding, about keeping it intimate. Close family only." "I am family." The words came out quietly, but they landed like stones. Sophie looked at me and I saw something in her eyes shift. A decision being made. A wall going up. "You're my stepmom," she said. The word hung in the air between us. Stepmom. Not mom. Not family. Stepmom. "Sophie," I said slowly. "What are you saying?" She looked at Kevin, then at James, then back at me. When she spoke again, her voice was firm, rehearsed. "I don't want you at the wedding, Trish." The room went silent. Even the air seemed to stop moving. "What?" "This is my day," she said. "Mine and Kevin's. It's about honoring my real mom, my mother, the woman who gave birth to me, who raised me until I was 14. I need this day to be about her memory." I couldn't breathe properly. "Olivia," Sophie continued, her voice getting stronger, "having you there, sitting in the front row like you're my mother, it doesn't feel right. It feels false. My mom died. You're not her. You never were." She gestured vaguely between us. "You're Trish. You've been nice. You've helped me. But let's be honest about what this is. You're not my mom. You never were." Kevin spoke quietly, almost desperately. "Soph, maybe we should talk about this later." "I need this day to be authentic," Sophie interrupted, her eyes locked on mine. "I need to honor her, and I can't do that if you're sitting there pretending to be something you're not." My mouth was dry. "Sophie, I'm paying for this wedding." "I know," she said. and she actually sounded annoyed that I'd brought it up. And I appreciate it. I really do. But this isn't about money. This is about what's right for me. If you don't want to pay anymore, that's fine. Kevin and I will figure something out. I looked at James. He was still in his chair by the window, hands gripping the armrests, staring at nothing. James, I said. He finally spoke, but he wouldn't look at me. Trish, she's emotional. Wedding planning is stressful. Did you know about this? Silence. James, did you know she was going to say this to me? He looked at Sophie instead of me. She's my daughter. This day is important to her. That wasn't an answer. It was an answer. She's your daughter, I repeated. And what am I? Don't make this harder than it needs to be, he said quietly. Kevin stood up abruptly. We should go. We should just go. Sophie started gathering her papers, her phone, her color-coded spreadsheets. She moved quickly, efficiently, like she wanted to be gone before I could say anything else. At the door, she turned back. Thanks for understanding, Trish. You're a good person. This doesn't change anything between us. I still care about you, but this day is special, and I need it to be right. Then they were gone. The front door closed. I heard Kevin's car start in the driveway, heard the sound fade down the street, and I was alone with my husband, who had said nothing to defend me, who had known this was coming, who had sat there and let his daughter tell me I wasn't family, that I'd been pretending for 16 years, that I didn't belong, who looked at me now with something that might have been pity or might have been relief that it was finally out in the open. Trish, he started. I held up my hand. Don't. I stood up, walked upstairs, closed the door to my office, and picked up my phone. I had 3 calls to make. But first, there was something I needed to do. Something I'd been doing, in small ways, for years without really knowing why. I started compiling the binder that night. 16 years of financial records don't organize themselves. Bank statements going back to 2010. Receipts I'd saved in labeled folders. Credit card bills. Tuition payments to Emory. $48,000 a year, times 4 years. Apartment deposits. The car purchase. The business loan. Every check I'd written, every transfer I'd made, every expense that had Sophie's name attached to it. I worked late into the night at my desk in the home office, the only sound the clicking of my keyboard and the occasional creak of the house settling around me. James had gone to bed without speaking to me. Or maybe he'd gone to a hotel. I didn't know. Didn't care. I was working on the shared family computer, the one James and I both used for household accounts and bills. As I opened a folder to cross-reference some old bank statements, I saw a file I didn't recognize. Draft, don't send. I stared at it for a moment. Probably something of James's. An unfinished email to a client, maybe. I should close it. Go back to my spreadsheets. But curiosity pulled at me. I clicked it open. It was an email. Addressed to James, from Sophie. Dated 3 months ago. Never sent. Saved in drafts and forgotten. The subject line read, Need to talk after wedding. I should have closed it. But I didn't. Dad, this is awkward, but I need to ask Trish for a cash gift after the wedding. Maybe $50,000. I'm in a bind financially and Kevin can't know. Once we get through the ceremony and I get the money, I can handle the rest. Can you help me approach her about it? Also, Aunt Linda thinks it's better if we keep the wedding authentic. Just blood family. I know Trish will be hurt, but this is my day. She'll understand eventually. She always does. Love you, Soph. I read it twice, then a third time. $50,000. After the wedding I wasn't invited to, for debts Kevin didn't know about. My hands were shaking. I picked up my phone and called Dennis Clark. Dennis had managed my investments for 15 years. He was good at his job and discreet. Dennis, I said when he answered, can you look into Sophie's finances? Credit reports, loan accounts, anything you can access legally. Trish, it's 11 at night. What's going on? Please, I need to know. Give me an hour, he said. It took him 45 minutes. Sophie had $45,000 in debt. Student loans she'd refinanced at terrible rates instead of asking me for help. $22,000. Credit cards maxed out. $15,000. A personal loan for $8,000 from some online lender charging interest rates that should have been illegal. She was living beyond her means. Designer clothes I'd seen on her Instagram. Expensive restaurants. Weekend trips to Charleston and Miami that she'd posted about. All of it on borrowed money. all of it carefully hidden from Kevin. And she'd planned to ask me, after excluding me from her wedding, after telling me I wasn't family, to write her a check for $50,000 to clean up the mess. My presence wasn't welcome, but my wallet was. I looked at the email again. It was addressed to James. He'd known about this, known about her debts, known about her plan to use me for money while shutting me out of her life. 3 months ago, the same time she'd started pulling away, spending more time with Aunt Linda, building the narrative that I wasn't really family. This had been calculated. All of it. I printed the email and added it to the growing stack of papers on my desk. Then I pulled up the credit report Dennis had sent and printed that, too. Evidence. All of it was evidence. I sat back in my chair and looked at the pile of documents. 16 years of giving. $45,000 in lies. One draft email that proved exactly how expendable I was. And for the first time in days, I smiled. Not with joy, not with satisfaction. With clarity. I finally understood exactly what I needed to do. The house was silent around me. James was asleep, or pretending to be, in the bedroom we hadn't really shared in months. The clock on my desk said 1:47 a.m. I opened a new document on my computer and started typing. Not the binder. That would take days to complete properly. This was something else. A list. 3 phone calls. 1. Susan Bradley, attorney, 9 a.m. tomorrow. 2. Dennis Clark, financial advisor, 10:30 a.m. tomorrow. 3. Sarah Mitchell, real estate agent, 7 a.m. tomorrow. I stared at the names. 3 people who could help me do what needed to be done. 3 conversations that would change everything. My finger hovered over the keyboard. This was it. The point of no return. Once I made these calls, once I set this in motion, there would be no going back. I thought about Sophie's face when she'd told me I wasn't her mother. About James's silence. About 16 years of showing up, of being there, of believing that love and patience would eventually matter. About a draft email that proved I'd always been nothing more than a wallet with a pulse. I saved the document, closed my laptop, walked to the window and looked out at the dark Atlanta night. The oak trees in the yard swayed slightly in the breeze. Those trees had been there long before James, long before Sophie, long before any of this. They'd still be there long after I was gone. I went to bed at 2 a.m., set my alarm for 6:30, and slept better than I had in weeks, because I finally knew what I was worth, and I wasn't going to accept anything less ever again. I woke at 6:30 to the sound of my alarm and the strange, light feeling of someone who'd finally made a decision. The first call was at 7 a.m. sharp. Sarah Mitchell, the voice answered, professional even at this hour. Sarah, it's Patricia Morrison. A pause. Sarah had sold me this house 21 years ago, back when I was single and building my career. We'd stayed in touch, occasional lunches, holiday cards. She'd sent flowers when I married James. Trish, is everything okay? I need to sell my house. Fast. Silence. Then, your house? The Buckhead Colonial? Yes. Trish, that property is worth at least $2.7 million in this market. Are you sure about this? Completely sure. How quickly can we move? I heard papers rustling, Sarah shifting into business mode. If you're serious, I can have photographers out today. Listed by Friday. We'll price it at 2.65, slightly under market for speed. Professional photos, virtual tour, I'll push my entire network. With a house like yours, we could have offers by next week. Cash buyers close faster. Do it. Trish, her voice softened. What's happening? I'm leaving, Sarah, and I need to move quickly. Another pause. Then, okay, I'll take care of everything. I'll call you this afternoon with the timeline. The second call was at 9 a.m. from the parking lot of a Starbucks. I couldn't make this call from the house. Susan Bradley. Susan, it's Patricia Morrison. I need to see you. Today, if possible. Susan had been my attorney for 20 years. She'd handled my first home purchase, my previous divorce, my estate planning. I trusted her completely. What's wrong? Direct, as always. My marriage is ending. I need to know my options. I heard her keyboard clicking. I have an opening at 10. Can you make it? I'll be there. Susan's office was in Midtown, all glass and clean lines. She met me in the lobby herself, took one look at my face, and ushered me into her private conference room. I told her everything. Calmly. methodically. Sophie's words, James's silence, the 16 years that apparently meant nothing. Susan didn't interrupt. When I finished, she sat back in her chair. "I'm so sorry, Trish, but let's talk about what we can do." She pulled up files on her laptop. "The house, you owned it before the marriage, correct?" 5 years before. My name is on the original deed. James moved in after the wedding. Good. Georgia law is clear on separate property. That house is yours. He can't touch it. Something in my chest loosened. The retirement accounts will need to be divided, but since you contributed more over the years, you'll walk away with the larger share. Joint savings splits 50-50. But Trish, she leaned forward. This is going to get ugly. James will fight back. Sophie will panic. You need to be ready for that. I am. She studied me for a long moment. Okay then, let's do this right. The third call was at 10:30 in Dennis Clark's office downtown. Dennis had managed my investments for 15 years. When I walked in, he had files spread across his desk. I pulled everything last night after your call, he said, gesturing for me to sit. But Trish, there's something you need to know. My stomach tightened. What? He slid a spreadsheet across the desk. James has been moving money around, past 6 months, transferring funds from your joint account to an account in his sister Linda's name. I stared at the numbers. $47,000, moved in small increments, carefully, deliberately. He was planning to leave you, Dennis said quietly, or at least preparing for it. I noticed it months ago. I should have said something. 6 months, right around the time Sophie started pulling away. How long until I can access everything that's legally mine? I asked. As soon as the house sells and the divorce is filed, your assets are protected. You'll be fine, Trish. More than fine, but this is going to hurt. I looked at him. It already does. The for sale sign went up on a Tuesday morning. I watched from the upstairs window as the installation crew hammered the post into the front lawn. Bold red letters against white. For sale, Sarah Mitchell Realty. I was making coffee when James came home that evening. I heard his car in the driveway. Heard the door slam harder than usual. Then he was in the kitchen doorway. What the hell is that sign doing on our lawn? I turned from the coffee maker, cup in hand. I'm selling the house. You're what? His face went red. You can't do that. I live here. Not for much longer. I took a sip of coffee. It was too hot, but I didn't flinch. Trish, this is insane. You're overreacting to one argument. To being told I don't matter, I corrected. To you choosing Sophie over me. This is vindictive. This is clarity, I said. You told me we'd been pretending for 16 years. I'm done pretending. He changed tactics, tried guilt. What about our marriage? 14 years and you're throwing it away? What about it, James? His hands clenched into fists at his sides. Not to hit me. James wasn't violent, but from frustration, from losing control. Where am I supposed to live? The question was so absurd I almost laughed. You'll figure it out. You and Sophie are family, right? Real family. You'll take care of each other. He pulled out his phone and dialed. I knew who he was calling. Sophie, you need to come over. Now. It's about Trish. She arrived in 40 minutes. I heard her car screech into the driveway, heard her footsteps running up the walk. When she burst through the door, her face was blotchy from crying in the car. Trish, please. She didn't even take off her coat. I'm sorry. I didn't mean it the way it sounded. I was stressed and stupid. You meant it, I said calmly. And I'm respecting that. You wanted me to disappear, so I am. Not like this. The wedding is 4 weeks away. The venue, they need final payment next week. That's not my problem anymore. Please. She was crying openly now. Kevin appeared in the doorway behind her, looking helpless. We can fix this. We can talk about it. There's nothing to fix, I said. Nothing to talk about. James tried again. Trish, be reasonable. I walked past all 3 of them and went upstairs. Into the bedroom James and I had shared for 14 years. I locked the door behind me. I heard them arguing downstairs. Sophie's voice rising and falling. James's low, angry rumble. Kevin trying unsuccessfully to calm them both. I sat on the edge of the bed and waited until I heard them leave. Car doors. Engines. Silence. 10 days after the house went under contract, someone rang the doorbell. James and Sophie had driven to Lenox Square that morning for her final dress fitting. I'd stayed behind, packing dishes into boxes labeled Donate and Storage. When I opened the door, Kevin stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight. He looked older than 30, tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Just the two of us?" I stepped aside and let him in. The living room was half empty now, furniture rearranged to stage the house for showings. I poured him coffee. He didn't drink it. "I was there," he said finally. "When Sophie said those things, I heard all of it." I sat across from him and waited. "I understand why you're doing this," he continued, "and I don't blame you." "Then why are you here, Kevin?" He exhaled slowly, like a man bracing for impact. "Because I've been seeing things I didn't want to see. The way she talks about people, waiters, cashiers, my younger sister." He paused. I told myself it was stress, or just the way she was raised. "But after what she said to you," his voice cracked, "I can't pretend anymore." "Then don't marry her." He looked at me with desperate eyes. "Part of me wants to call it off, but I've invested too much. The ring cost me 6 months' salary. We put down deposits. My parents are flying in from Ohio, and I love her. Or I love who I thought she was." I leaned forward. "Can I tell you something, Kevin? Watch how someone treats people who can't do anything for them anymore. That's their real character. Right now, I can't do anything for Sophie, and you're seeing who she becomes when I'm no longer useful." Kevin stared at his untouched coffee. "Did I make a mistake?" "That's not for me to answer," I said gently. "But you already know." He stood slowly, like a man carrying weight he couldn't put down. At the door, he turned back one last time. "What would you do if you were me?" I thought of 16 years, of late-night phone calls and hospital waiting rooms and checks I'd written without asking for anything back. Of James's silence in that living room. Of Sophie's voice. Just real family. "I'd walk away," I said quietly. "But I'm not you, and sunk costs are only sunk if you keep sinking." Kevin nodded once and left. I never saw him face to face again. But months later, I came across the wedding photos online. Someone had tagged Sophie in an album. In every single shot, Kevin looked like a man attending a funeral, not a wedding. I moved out 3 days before the Hendersons took possession of the house. Packing had taken nearly a week. Not because I had so much. After 16 years, I realized most of what filled that house wasn't mine. The furniture went to a consignment shop in Buckhead. Sophie's childhood things, still boxed in the attic, I left for James to deal with. My personal belongings fit into a storage unit off Howell Mill Road. I'd rented a service apartment in Midtown, month-to-month lease, small, clean, anonymous. A place to land while I figured out what came next. On my last night in the house, I sat alone on the kitchen floor. The counters were bare, the walls were blank, the rooms echoed. In front of me sat the binder, black leather, 3 inches thick, 16 years organized chronologically. Bank statements, credit card bills, wire transfer confirmations, every receipt I could find labeled with dates and amounts, tuition payments to Emory University, rent checks for 5 different apartments, car insurance, medical bills, the business loan I'd covered when her startup failed, plane tickets, groceries, birthday gifts, emergency loans she never paid back, $520,000. I'd printed the email too, the draft she'd left on the shared computer. "Dad, can you help me ask Trish for a cash gift after the wedding? Maybe $50,000. Kevin can't know." And I'd included a timeline. Small moments documented. The year she stopped calling me on Mother's Day. The Christmas she didn't come home. The family dinner where she introduced me as Dad's wife instead of her stepmother. At the front of the binder, I placed a letter. I didn't write it in anger. I didn't write it to wound. I wrote it because after 16 years of sacrifice, I wanted her to understand what family really meant. "Sophie, these are the receipts. All of them. 16 years of showing up. I'm not giving you this to hurt you. I'm giving you this because you need to understand what family actually means. Not the one you're born into, the one you choose, the one you show up for, the one you honor not because of blood, but because of commitment. You told me I was pretending. You were right. I was pretending you saw me. I was pretending I mattered. I was pretending sacrifice was the same as love. I don't want your apology. I don't want your money. I want you to learn something I learned too late. People will show you who they are. Believe them. You are capable of great things, Sophie. But until you understand that love isn't about usefulness, you'll keep losing people who would have stayed. I hope your marriage to Kevin survives what mine to your father didn't. The moment you stop being convenient. Take care of yourself. Patricia, yet I sealed the binder and set it on the kitchen counter, right in the center, where no one could miss it. Then I walked through the empty house one last time. The living room where we'd argued over seating charts. The dining room where James had avoided my eyes. The bedroom where I'd slept alone for the last 2 weeks. The office where I'd made 3 calls that changed everything. I locked the front door behind me, dropped the keys into the mailbox for Sarah to retrieve, got into my car, the one thing that was entirely mine, and drove away. I didn't look back. Not at the house, not at the neighborhood, not at the life I'd built brick by brick for a family that had never truly been mine. Somewhere in Atlanta, Sophie was probably calling again, leaving another voicemail I'd never listened to. Somewhere, James was sitting in a hotel room wondering how everything had fallen apart. But I wasn't thinking about them. I was thinking about Savannah, about moss-covered oaks and the salt smell of the coast, about a small cottage I'd seen online with a front porch and room for a garden, about starting over at 60 years old with nothing but a storage unit and a clean conscience. The binder would do its work without me. I'd done mine. 3 days later, the Hendersons moved in. 2 days after that, James went back to the house to retrieve something he'd forgotten. He found the binder on the counter. My phone started ringing at 6:47 in the morning. I was sitting in the service apartment with my coffee, watching the sun come up over Midtown. James's name lit up the screen. I didn't answer. A text came through 30 seconds later. Call me now. I ignored it. At 7:15, Sophie called. I let it go to voicemail. Even through the silence, I could hear her sobbing. At 7:30, James called again. This time I answered. What did you do? His voice shook, not with anger, with something worse. Good morning, James. The binder, Trish. I saw all of it. Oh, you found it. $520,000. You tracked every single dollar. This is sick. This is accurate, I said. That's what it is. Sophie's falling apart. Good, I said quietly. She told me I didn't matter. I showed her I did. The wedding's in 2 weeks. The venue needs... Not my problem anymore, James. He hung up. At 8 o'clock, Sophie called. She could barely speak through the tears. Trish, please, I'm sorry. I was stupid. I was selfish. I see it now. You see the receipts, I said. That's not the same as understanding. I understand what you did for me now. Everything. You understand the money, I corrected. But this was never about money. I'll pay you back. I swear. I don't know how, but... Keep your money, Sophie. Spend it on therapy instead. Figure out why you think people are disposable. Please, her voice cracked. I'll invite you to the wedding. Front row. You can walk me down the aisle. Whatever you want. I closed my eyes. I don't want a pity invitation. I wanted respect. I wanted to matter. You made it clear I didn't. So now I'm leaving. It's been 16 years. Exactly, I said. It took 16 years for you to show me who you really are. I'm choosing to believe you now. I hung up. For a long moment, I sat in the silence of the empty apartment, the phone in my hand, the coffee going cold, the morning light slanting through unfamiliar windows. And I felt peace. Not victory, not satisfaction. Just the quiet certainty of someone who'd finally stopped pretending. 6 months later, I was sitting on the front porch of a small cottage in Savannah, watching the sunset paint the Spanish moss golden. The divorce had been finalized in March. Efficient, sterile, like dismantling furniture. The house sale, $2.7 million, was mine. The retirement accounts were divided, with me taking the larger share. No alimony, no support, no lingering financial ties. By April, I'd bought this cottage. 2 bedrooms, wraparound porch, room for the garden I'd always wanted. I planted tomatoes, basil, and wildflowers. The cheap kind that Sophie had rejected. They bloomed beautifully. I was 61 now. I volunteered at the Women's Resource Center on Tuesdays, teaching financial literacy to women leaving difficult situations. I took yoga on Wednesdays. I had a book club every other Friday. I painted watercolors on Thursdays, clumsy, amateur, joyful. I'd made friends, real ones. Dr. Sarah Bennett from my yoga class, Margaret from the book club. Women who showed up because they wanted to, not because they needed something. The wedding had happened. I learned later they'd downsized, from the Blue Ridge to a restaurant in Buckhead. 50 guests instead of 200. In the photos I never asked to see but somehow found their way to me, Kevin looked exactly like I'd told him he would. Like a man at a funeral. I didn't think about James much anymore. When I did, I felt nothing. Not anger, not regret, just distance. Sophie crossed my mind sometimes. I wondered if she'd learned anything, if her marriage survived, if she ever understood what family really meant. Then I'd remember, wondering wasn't my job anymore. I took a sip of my iced tea and looked out at the garden, at the wildflowers blooming freely, at the life I'd built that asked nothing of me except that I show up for it. For the first time in 16 years, I wasn't a stepmother. I wasn't a wife. I wasn't anyone's wallet or backup plan or convenient safety net. I was just Patricia, and that was more than enough. From somewhere distant, I could hear the ocean, the rhythmic pull and release, the sound of things letting go. I'd spent 16 years trying to earn a place in a family that was never going to make room for me. Now I had a place I'd made for myself, and I'd never been happier.